I swear to you guys, I am not a PlayStation only channel here. But the PS5 has just been added to the list of the C-bomb, what should I say, victims. Now, to explain the C-bomb, there's a lot of stuff that we've covered on this channel previously with the CMOS battery in the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4. I will include links in the description down below to videos that I have made on this issue, along with videos that other creators who I respect have made on it and talked about. And I do want to get a couple things out of the way here real quick, just bullet points to hit before we get started. One, the TLDR is there is a special battery, I'm dumbing it down, in your PlayStation 3 and 4, and it has now been discovered in the PlayStation 5, which monitors certain things inside your console, including the internal clock that you cannot mess with without jailbreaking your system. Whether you choose to do that or not, it's up to you, but I'm just telling you, you can't mess with it without doing that. So the issue that we've been finding is that on PS3, when this battery dies, if you cannot connect to PlayStation Network at all, like let's say PSN's dead in the future on PS3, you can no longer play any digital games you own unless your system is jailbroken, or you never had your CMOS battery die, for example. The PS4 is even worse. Pretty much every physical disc doesn't actually work for the most part without either a CMOS battery or some kind of connection to PSN. This has been taken apart and proven by a lot of people online. And then you have the PS5, which is now suffering from the same issue because a kind volunteer, as Does It Play on Twitter.com pointed out, was able to take their unit apart and find a CMOS battery. There have been tests conducted now on the PS5, and it suffers from the same problem. I'm getting very tired of seeing the disingenuous, I'm just going to say bullshit from certain people who enjoy video games who just treat this as a completely throwaway hobby in terms of it not mattering if anything's preserved. This isn't about like, oh, you're just whining because your thing won't work in 10 years or 15 years or whatever. That's not really what it's about. It's about the preservation of digital media and the fact that Sony is borderline encouraging piracy, console, I guess I'm trying to think about it, say it, jailbreaking, and getting ROMs for free. Now, I'm not sitting here encouraging you to do that. How you feel about emulation, how you feel about how you get your games, all that stuff, that's all up to you at the end of the day. If you, you feel super comfortable with that, that's what you do. Hey, man, I'm not really here to judge you. I just prefer to get my games legitimately. That's what I prefer, I prefer to get a disc. That's me. This is why I've been very cautious about digital for years, because there has always been these EULAs that if someone wants to, they can take the thing from you, essentially. If you sign these EULAs, which you are doing by using their online service, whether you like it or not, and you buy digital games or whatever, they can have those licenses revoked from you and you can lose them eventually. That's why things like this are legal. The CMOS battery, what I believe is planned obsolescence in 3 generations of consoles now in a row, why that's legal to basically set up a ticking time bomb in your hardware to fail on purpose, I believe, is because you essentially have signed over your rights to those things. Now, whether that will be 100% legally binding or not, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. However, there are things such as good faith in legal arguments. And one of the things that means is that essentially Sony could take, if you tried to take Sony to court and say, hey, you took my stuff away, they could essentially say, well, you signed that, and our good faith agreement was that we would offer this for, a lengthy amount of time. We did the PS3 store now and the PlayStation 3 network, let's say it goes down. They finally went down now years and years later. We in good faith honored our agreement, and the judge would likely say, yeah, why would you expect access to this 20 years later? It's just like a fridge. And I guess that's the problem I have with this, is that I do believe this is planned obsolescence to push you to the next console generation of games. And I don't understand this. I mean, PC gaming doesn't have this issue. Yes, your parts can go bad. Yes, you eventually need a new machine, but you always have access to those games as long as you have your account. You can certainly have DRM issues with Steam. That's a whole nother, ballpark. And that's why I think GOG is great for a lot of people to get their games. but this is extremely frustrating. So when we're looking at this update as a whole, like the entire thing from Does It Play, the volunteers who worked on this, and everybody else, they did talk about how the PS5 is affected by this CMOS battery. The issue essentially is that they don't know to what extent yet. It is vulnerable to a dead battery and no access to Sony servers at some point in the future. However, the extent to which it is vulnerable is yet to be determined because it depends on the game. So essentially what they did was they removed the CMOS battery. They took the thing out of there as if it was dead and couldn't do anything on inside your system. They took it out, and then they disconnected from the internet entirely. The console went into safe mode upon the first boot and began to rebuild the database for the console. Restarting the machine resolved this initial problem, but once the machine was booted correctly, all digital games stopped working completely. So anything you had purchased digitally on the PlayStation 5, dead. If you own a PlayStation 5 digital only edition, that thing is worthless if this happens. Physical PlayStation 4 discs did boot, and trophies seemed to work. Even though it wouldn't actually tell the servers that you got them because there would be no servers. Although Resident Evil 2 would intermittently display error messages stating something went wrong. So there could be more games, that are affected by this, since not every single PlayStation 4 disc has been run through the PS5 yet with this issue. However, physical PS5 discs are mixed results, like in terms of this. Mortal Kombat 11 wouldn't even install. It crashed at 97%. Spider-Man Miles Morales actually booted and played no problem on the PS5 version. And then you have plenty of games like COD Black Ops, where essentially you could boot it, but because there's so much reliance on game servers, the game's borderline unplayable. They're still going through the tests to actually see what's going on, but this is just the initial results, and it's pretty bad. Now, look, I've seen a lot of anger around Sony. Trust me, I'm there with you for people who care about this. But Does It Play and some of these other people have actually put together a template which you can send to Sony. You can kind of, mess with it, edit it, add things in. And they do say to be polite to Sony and to their representatives and stuff. At the end of the day, whoever you talk to about this issue didn't do it. It's almost like if I go into a Walmart and I scream at the cashier for something management does, right? The cashier didn't do anything. What am I doing here? I'm wasting my time. And these corporate jerks, in my opinion, they purposely put people in those positions under them, right? They're the fall guys. They're the guy who it's like, oh, I don't have to be the cashier. They'll yell at the cashier if I do something bad. I'm good. I'm just going to hide in the back. That's what a lot of these management types do with a lot of this stuff, is they delegate that responsibility and they don't take any of it for themselves. It's why people like Jim Ryan can go on, and say statements like old games are borderline worthless, which he didn't say exactly, but that's my opinion of what he said about things like Gran Turismo. Who would even want to play these old games is basically what he was saying. That's why you can have these CEOs and these management types saying this stuff and making these sorts of planned obsolescence, in my opinion, decisions, and not facing any consequence for it, because there's people under them who you'll scream at, who will take the brunt of it. And it's extremely frustrating. This has essentially caused 3 generations in a row of console, at least from one company, because Sony's the one that people are mainly looking at right now, to be borderline useless to useless. The PS4 is an absolute disaster with this issue. The thing is garbage without the CMOS battery or any connection to the internet. It is worth noting that these batteries can last 15 to 20 years. That is a long time. But in terms of game preservation, this is not good. And to the people who always say, well, then, everything should be pirated. Emulation is the future. Let's say you're 100% right. Emulation is the future, right? Let's say I don't care at all about piracy. Let's say I'm just all in on it, right? I do not care. So under that scenario, you still have the problem of having to wait a long ass time for things to work right. Essentially, the way that this runs is in sort of a legal gray area in a lot of different places, where it's emulation is not illegal. Backing up games you own and then playing them on your computer through emulation software, to the best of my knowledge, at least in America, that's not illegal in really any regard. Where it becomes a legal issue is when you are getting games that you don't own for free, like downloading ROMs of games you don't own and keeping them. And also when you are, sometimes the BIOS is tricky. Like, I know dumping PS2 BIOSes that you don't own was technically a breach of copyright law back in the day. I'm not sure if anyone even gives a crap anymore, but it used to be. So like there's a lot of misunderstanding around emulation too, in terms of like people are scared of it because they think it's all illegal. It's not. To the best understanding of me, who is not a lawyer in America, if I own Silent Hill 2 Greatest Hits Edition, and I want to play that on PCSX2 in my PC, I can back that game up onto my computer off the files of my disk and play it through PCSX2 legally. That's my understanding of it. That's pretty much everyone's understanding of it. And there's not a problem with that. It's essentially, though, in the law on you to dump your own game's backups, I guess, or like to rip the game from your physical edition into your computer to play it. Or with things like PCSX2 with emulation, you can actually play PS2 discs. There are ways to do that with PS1 and tons of other things going back as well if you have the right files and you know what you're doing. What I'm getting at, though, is that it takes years for these things to be on the same level as the console, and then more years for them to be better. For example, PS3 emulation is still a work in progress. Yes, it's working well now, but for example, on that, Metal Gear Solid 4, fantastic game, love it to death. It has just recently left a sorry state in terms of emulation. Like, a couple of years ago, they were having problems with textures flickering out and disappearing, the game not running right, low frame rates like in the 15s and 20s, sometimes unplayable. These were issues they were having a couple years ago on a game that came out, a long time ago, basically a decade ago. And they were still having those issues, just a couple years ago. And now finally we're hitting a point with the PS3 emulation where that's not a huge problem anymore, and that game has been digitally preserved online. Now, however the copyright holders want to look at that, blah, 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 I don't really care, up to them, but it has been. The problem is you need these physical files. Generally, it's easier with them to preserve these games. It's easier if somebody out there has MGS5 physically on PS4, it's going to be easier to then essentially preserve the PS4 version of that game. As we move more and more towards digital and people can be locked out more and more, there are more and more of these games that are becoming inaccessible or harder to find without stealing them. I mean, that's the easiest way to put it, right? Things like Persona 2. Persona 2 is on the PS3 store. It's about $10. I recommend you get it if you're interested in Persona because you can figure it out yourself. There are many ways to keep your digital games eventually when that CMOS battery dies and the PlayStation Network connection is no more on your PS3, and I will leave it there for you. That game is about $10. Guess what it is physically, at least on eBay and other sites like that where it's actually selling? Upwards of $300, complete. I'm talking original case, original manual, actual disc, not a pirated copy that was ripped onto a CD. This game's like $300. What are you going to do? Where are you going to get this? The only way to get it in the future is to steal it online. And that's the problem that they are making with this, with these decisions. They're essentially encouraging an atmosphere of not only, emulation's not the problem. It's not of like, it's bad to emulate. You can't back up your games and play them, or you can't, blah, blah, blah. No one cares about that. But they're creating an atmosphere where it's going to be easier to steal games or get them illegitimately, however you want to put it, because people are very defensive about that, than it is to buy them, than it is to get them, than it is to hold on to them. This undermines consumer confidence. It makes people feel like, why should I buy your game for $10 or $20 or $30 when I can get it for free and you can't take it from me? This is essentially like if instead of going the way that streaming went with torrenting, back in the day for DVDs, Blu-rays, like all this stuff, there were people who torrented it, and there still are, but generally it's become easier in a lot of areas to just access media very cheaply. Just for example, it's much easier for me to access Daredevil on Netflix for a cheap monthly subscription than it is to just go torrent it. It made the illegal act of obtaining media outside of the legitimate means, not backing up something you own, but just obtaining something you don't, it made that like more difficult than it was to just access it cheaply. And when you are undermining consumer confidence like this and telling them essentially, hey, eventually the thing you bought is worthless, right? And you are going against a precedent that is decades in the making. The Nintendo 64 still works. The SNES still works. Yes, there are like hardware failures and issues with them, but they can be repaired. You know, all these things, you can fix them up, you can get them running again. But when you're purposely building issues into your system to cause it to die eventually, you're undermining that consumer confidence, you're pushing them towards emulation, you're pushing them towards PC gaming, you're pushing them away from your market and towards competitive companies. It's just a bad look overall. Now, there are things that are worth getting digitally, absolutely. And there are areas in the world where that is basically all you can do. Totally get it. You know, if you live in a country where it's like $100 to get a physical game, but it's $50 to get it digitally, and you don't have a lot of money, totally get it. You know, that's your option. And that's the other thing is they've backed a lot of consumers into corners in different areas of the world where they only have certain options. And now those options are getting worse and worse. It's like Darth Vader. You know, I'm altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it further. I really believe that Sony thinks that they're just on this high horse where they can't make a single mistake. And they've made so many behind the scenes that people haven't seen. And it is so infuriating how much, despite the fact that I play PlayStation way more than Xbox, Xbox has gotten such a shit end of the stick in terms of people like dumping on it, taking shots at it over and over and over since the DRM issues, you know, Don Matrick, the Kinect, all that stuff at the beginning of Xbox One. But this was all going like down in the background of Sony and no one noticed it. Nobody, myself included, until now. These companies are not your friends. They're not there to be your buddy. They're there to make money off of you. And we do need to let them know what we think about this. It might change nothing at all, but it's infinitely frustrating. It causes a bad precedent in terms of console gaming where things should now be made to fail eventually, which I think is just a horrible choice. It has created a rift between consumers of video games and the producers of them. I see more and more people going to video game piracy, or at least saying they will, in places like the comments or online on Facebook, Twitter, all these different places, just being like, okay, well, F you, I'm just going to go take your game. This is not good for anybody. This is bad for everyone. Emulation's not the problem. Again, I'll say it for the 100th time, but it's also not an easy solution. Yes, eventually emulation will save your game. Do you want to wait 10 years for it to do so well? Maybe you're willing to, and you know, that's fine. Playing Metal Gear Solid 4 on your PC nowadays where it runs really well, if you have the right patches and you have everything, you know, running right, that's awesome. But 5 years ago, that wasn't working right. 10 years ago, it wasn't really working at all. So it's not an easy solution. There are no easy answers. I really do think people need to reach out and tell Sony what they think. But at the end of the day, they've already made their money off the PS5, the PS4, and the PS3. They got your money. There's no actual reason for them to change it unless they start losing money. And I don't know how to go about that. You know, like there are games that it's like if you want to play them, like Persona 2, you're probably going to get them off the PSN store on PS3 before that shuts down. They get some money for that. And it just sucks. You know, there's no winning. You can punish yourself and just not have access to any console exclusives at all, that some of which are very good. You could punish yourself and say like, well, because you're doing this, I won't buy Persona 2 or I won't buy, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some other rare game, that Front Mission 3 that's usually like $80, but it's like $10 on your PS3 store. I won't buy those because I don't want to give you my money. You can do that, but then you're not going to be able to play that game without taking it from the internet illicitly. It's just created a very, very, very bad situation and I guess environment for gaming right now. And it just frustrates me. I'm at a loss for words at this point. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on the solution to this? Will you be contacting Sony and letting them know? Do you care about this? I do still plan to put together a couple of lists, like top 5s of games that are more rare, that if you want a chance to play it legitimately, this might be your time to get it off the PS3 store. But again, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. You know, this is the Aquaman situation I talked about. I don't like Amber Heard. But if I don't go see Aquaman, people are going to ask, well, what did you think of it? Why didn't you watch it? You said you'd review it. You said you'd do this. And it's like, well, I could go watch it and I feel like some of my money's going to Amber, or I could just skip it and then I don't get to see Aquaman. This is the same thing. You can avoid them, buy nothing, they get no money, but you don't get your games. Or you can give them some money, get your games, and then they still get money. I don't know what the solution is to this. It's very frustrating. Let me know what you think. I'm going to stop talking. I'm lost for words. See you in the next one. Have a fantastic day. As always, stay shui.